All right, let's talk about MCP. What is this all about? You've probably seen it around, and I know a lot of you are a little bit confused about this. So what does it mean, and why could it be the future of a lot of communication on the web actually? So there is a website for it, but before we actually look at it, let's actually build some intuition for why we even want this. So on the one side, we will have users, and they are in a lot of applications these days. They are in ChatGPT, they're in Cloud Desktop, and you've probably been using at least one of those. I'm actually in ChatGPT all the time. And if you're a developer, you've probably also been using some kind of AI coding Copilot. So here in Visual Studio Code, for example, I have the GitHub Copilot where I can also type. And there are many other applications, but the point is that this is where users currently already are, but more and more will be as well. And from these applications is where a user wants to do things. For example, a user may want to book a trip. Now, in the past, what people would do is they would find some website, some travel website, and they would have to mentally parse the design of that page and fill out the information. And then the website would suggest some options. But what I personally believe is that users will not go themselves to those websites. They will stay inside their AI chat applications and they will just add the query they have or thing they want to do. And they will just hand off that task to the agent that those applications have. So what I would like to do, for example, if I'm in Cloud Desktop, I would like to say something like, hey, can you please suggest a trip for me next week? Something sunny, 2-hour flight at most. This is a much better experience for me as a user because I can stay inside the app I'm already using for many other things as well. I don't have to go to some other website, mentally parse the design of the website. It can all be done inside the chat application I'm already familiar with. I'm basically handing it off to the agent that Cloud offers me, and that agent will then perhaps go to that website. So I'm basically handing off this task to the agent. Let's say I'm using Cloud Desktop, and then that agent on my behalf will perhaps go to that website and fill out the required information. And once it has the information, it will synthesize a response to me in my Cloud app, right? So actually I use ChatGPT a lot, and ChatGPT as of recording doesn't have MCP servers yet, but just as an example, this is what I would like to do here. If I press enter, I want it to go out to the internet and suggest something for me. I don't want to go to other websites and find 10 or 20 different travel websites. I want to hand off this task to my AI agent. You can see it's already exploring things here. And now you can see it starts to search on the internet for me. So not only is it much easier for me, I don't have to even manually type anything. It can also do much more, because if I had to manually find websites, I would have to find perhaps 10 or 20 different websites myself. That would take a long time. So it can do that much faster for me. And then ultimately it will have collected the information, and you can see it has suggested some destinations for me. The thing is with a website, if I go to 10 different websites, I have to parse the design of 10 different websites and have to learn how to interact with that website. Here, the results I get are all going to be essentially streamlined into the same design. So it's mentally easier. So overall, I would say this is a much better experience for the user than manually going to a bunch of travel websites, filling out all this information yourself. And therefore, I think more and more people will be sitting inside these applications. And this was just an example of suggesting a trip, basically retrieving some information. But ultimately, we also want to do something. So if I booked my trip and suddenly I found out, oh wait, we actually want to stay one more night, and actually we do want to go with the breakfast offering from the hotel, but I already booked it, now I need to change my trip. Yes, I could then go to that travel website, I could manually log in, I could try to find where they kept their, right, I have to find where on the website I can change my trip and change all of these details. Very mentally exhausting actually. Whereas now it's just a simple message here that I can just send to AI agent hosted by ChatGPT or maybe some other application, and they will do that on my behalf. So then if I say something like this, and maybe I'm using Cloud Desktop, again, they would reach out to the travel website on my behalf and do everything for me. It's so much easier. It's such a better experience. So I think a lot of the interaction that people will have on the internet is going to be through these AI agents from these apps. So just to give you one more example from a developer point of view. So I'm using Visual Studio Code here and I have GitHub Copilot. Let's say I want to do something like I want to create a new so-called repository on my GitHub account. Yes, I could manually go to GitHub. So I could manually do that. I could go to github.com, I could log into my account here, and I could, find some button where I can create a new repo and then fill out all the information in the form on the website. I could manually do that. However, if I'm already working a lot in this AI chat application, it would also be nice, at least sometimes, to do it from here instead of having to manually go and switch my context. So I would like to type something like create a new repository, AI test, let's make it private, and also give me the link. Right, so now if I do this, if I press enter here, I would like it to go to GitHub on my behalf and actually create a repository. And now you see something really interesting. It can actually do that already. Today it can do that because it's using a so-called MCP-server. So what actually happened here is that my coding copilot here, it went to GitHub, and technically not the website. GitHub actually has an MCP server now. Now what it did was it actually used a tool offered by GitHub. So it was the create repository tool. The GitHub MCP server has specified that this is a tool that is available. And if you want to call it, you can imagine a tool is basically like a function. Right, so you can call it, and you may have to pass in some information. This is the information that my agent passed in for me, and this is the output that the agent got back from GitHub. Okay, it's using that information then to synthesize the final response here. All right, so now if I go here, you can see I have a new repository here that I did not manually create myself. It was actually my AI agent that did it for me. Right, so very similar as to what we saw before. Right, so in this case, I had a prompt like create a new repo. But as a developer, you can imagine, you can also say something like create React code out of the Figma design, right? So my designer in Figma has created a design, and now we need to implement that in the React code. So I could say this, something like this, and now my AI agent would need to know about the Figma design. But so now I would like my AI agent to interact with Figma to get the necessary information from that design so it can then implement it. And so you can see that where I think it's going to go is users will be sitting inside some AI application, and they will hand off all of these tasks to an AI agent who in turn will go to the required services and get the required information or do the things. It's not only about retrieving information, it's also about doing things like create a new repo, changing a trip. Now, where does MCP come into play? Why do we need MCP for this? When I say something like create a new repo, right? So what we just saw with my GitHub Copilot here, when I said something like create a new repository, okay? So now I hand off that task to my Copilot, and it knows it needs to create a new repository on GitHub. But how does it know how to do that? Well, GitHub may have API endpoints. So typically a lot of the services, they already have some kind of a REST API or API endpoint. And maybe there is already an API endpoint for create repo or something like that, right? So maybe there is already some API endpoint as an example here. I'm not sure exactly how GitHub does that, but it could be something like create repo. Maybe Figma already has something like get design info. And maybe that travel service doesn't only have a website, but they also have an API endpoint that you can programmatically hook into destinations or something like that. Basically, there already exists a standard REST API that allows for programmatic interaction. So why do we need a different standard? Why? Well, for example, if I say to my Copilot, hey, create a new repo, yeah, maybe there is an API endpoint, basically a URL, /create repo, but how would it know what information to pass in there? How would it even know this exists? And how would it know to pick this API endpoint and not some other one? It could try to discover all of those API endpoints. Well, there is something called Open API, or there are schemas out there that have tried to standardize that. And typically there will be some way to discover all of the API endpoints and what kind of data you need to pass in. So technically the AI agent could try to use that, but not every service adheres to the Open API schema, or they may deviate in some ways. And also those API endpoints are not really built for AI agents. They were engineered for human developers to programmatically interact with their service. Also, there may be services like, for example, Puppeteer, right? So I may say something like create screenshot of website for me, this website. Right, so I may say something like create a screenshot of this website, and I want to use Puppeteer for that. I want my AI agent to interact with Puppeteer. Now Puppeteer is just going to be a software program already running on my computer, let's say. This is not going to be some REST API server on the internet, right? So a service like this doesn't really have like a standard, like the same API as what you would expect from some website server. So with MCP, we can unify a lot of those services and give them one optimized standard for these AI agents. And there are some other reasons as well. So instead of using the API endpoint, a service like GitHub may decide to offer an MCP server. And that's why it works really well here. When I give a prompt like this to my AI agent will use the GitHub MCP. And so here, when I gave it a task of create a new repository called AI test, it did not use these REST API endpoints. It used a so-called tool from an MCP server. It used the create repository tool. So GitHub recently actually created this MCP server, our AI agent, to interact with. And because of that, there's not going to be some API endpoint like create repo is like a REST API. Instead, this MCP server has so-called tool. In this case, it used the create repository tool, right? So the GitHub MCP, instead of having an API endpoint, there are typically tools, right? So there are some other things on MCP servers, but I would say it focuses around tools. So if I give some prompt to my AI agent, it will try to find the appropriate tool for that and not some API endpoint, right? So in this case, it used the create repository tool. Now here in my application here, just to show you that, I can see the tools that this MCP server from GitHub actually offers. So you can see there's GitHub here, and there's many different tools. There's also create branch. So my AI agent can decide to invoke that tool. It can open a new issue. Here is the create repository tool, get issue details, for example, and there's many tools here. And previously, these would probably be some kind of API endpoint. So you can see there's a bunch of tools here. I believe there's more than 50 already available. Yeah, this allows my AI agent to basically do things on my GitHub account on behalf of me. All right, and I'm going to show you something really cool, so make sure you watch all the way to the end. But before I continue, I quickly want to show you ImageKit. They are also today's sponsor. So I know a lot of you are building apps and websites, and you will need to upload images and videos at some point. And you want to deliver those media assets in an optimized manner as well. And you also want to be able to manage those assets easily as well. So that's what you can use ImageKit for. I've actually enjoyed working with them in the past as well. They have a very easy platform to upload my assets and manipulate them, deliver them in an optimized manner. So what I can do, for example, is here in the dashboard or also programmatically through their API, I can upload the asset. So if I have an image on my website, for example, I can add that here. I can actually upload it from different sources, not only my own computer, also these other sources where you already may have your asset. You may actually also want to get them from external storage. So if you already have something there, you can just connect that, no problem. But let's say I actually upload an image here. So this is the image I want to upload here. If I upload this one super fast, and now it's uploaded. So then here it's going to be placed in my media library. So here I can manage all of my assets. I can click on that and I can tag them, for example, or I can add metadata. I can do other things here, basically manage all of these assets. And actually now it also allows me to remove the background here with a button in the dashboard as well, very neat. But of course, at some point we actually want to display it in our website or web app. And so I need some kind of URL. I can copy that from here. And now I can add that to my website, let's say. Right, so here I have my image, and this has actually automatically been optimized for me. So if I check out the network tab and I load the page here, what are we actually loading here? I actually uploaded a PNG image, but now you can see the content type is actually WebP, which is an optimized format. So I like seeing that. And you can see it's also been placed on a CDN for me. This image is now being delivered in an optimized manner, and I don't even have to do much. I can actually decide here in the settings if I want to change that. So here under settings, images, I can decide how it should be optimized. So because I toggled this on, it will actually use WebP, for example. It may actually optimize the image quality even further. The default quality is 80, but we can change that if we want. And we have a lot of other options here as well, including signed URLs for some additional security. Now this is an image, but of course it works very similarly for videos. So with videos, it's even more important because these can be huge files, so that you optimize them is even more important. So here you can specify the video codec. So with this option, it will actually pick for me, so that's really nice as well. The video quality can be changed as well. Right, so a lot of options here in the dashboard, but what I actually also want to show you is that we can transform this image further. Your users will go to your website and web apps on different devices with different internet speed. If we only have one big image, essentially, that's not going to be optimal, right? Because on a mobile phone, I don't need to load such a big image. I can load a smaller image. So we can optimize it even further by creating essentially derivative versions of this image or video if you have video. And actually, it's super easy to do because you just change the URL. Actually, as of recording, they just added AI transformations here, particularly removing the background. So this has now been made cheaper by ImageKit. We can remove the background, but we can also change the actual size of the image, the actual dimensions. Very important for different devices. So we do that by just changing the URL. So I can add something here like TR for transform, and I can say the width, if the user is on mobile phone, let's say, on that device, I'm going to load this image with this URL. And so if I press enter here, you can see ImageKit has created a new image essentially with that particular width. And we can do the same for height if we want. I can also say that no, the height should be 400, let's say. Of course, I can combine them as well and have multiple transformations in the same URL. So we can resize images. We can also crop them. So if you want to remove something, we can also crop to a face, for example. If you want to remove the things outside the face, let's say. There's object aware cropping, so it's pretty sophisticated. We can add overlays as well. So if you want to add something to an image, maybe a watermark, let's say. But of course, these days we live in the age of AI, so ImageKit also has these AI transformations. It's not only background removal, also generative fill. So if you want to add something to an image, upscale it, or even generate an image via text prompt is possible as well. There are effects as well, so blur, flip, etc. And a lot of those transformations are possible for videos as well. We can create video thumbnails, we can trim the videos, and I actually also did a video with ImageKit on adaptive bitrate streaming. So if you want to see how to set all of this up from scratch, step by step, make sure to check out the other videos I did with ImageKit. They have a good guide here on how to optimize the images as well, by the way. So check out the documentation here for how to optimize images and videos, and they'll show you exactly what to do, squeeze out as much as you can. And overall, I had a great time working with ImageKit. I think it's a great product, so I would say check them out. You can find a link in the description. In any case, I want to thank ImageKit for sponsoring the video. And now let's get back to the video. Now, to really get a good intuition for how MCP works, you actually may want to try building an MCP server yourself. So building an MCP server may be particularly interesting if you already offer a website. If you already offer a service yourself, I run ByteGrad, which is an e-learning service. And currently I only have a website, right? So this is my website. If people want to know, for example, what courses are available on my website, yes, technically they could go to my website, they could go to courses, right? But what's going to happen, I think, is people are going to be inside these AI chat app, and they're going to hand off these tasks to their AI agents. And those AI agents will interact with my service on behalf of their user. To optimize that communication, we now have that MCP standard. So I would probably also want to offer an MCP server so that the AI agents reaching out on behalf of their users can interact with my service in an optimized manner. Right? So if there's a user in an AI chat app saying something like, what courses does ByteGrad recommend for me? I'm a beginner, right? So technically this user could actually go to my website, and I have a page on here where I recommend certain courses, and they could try to manually do it themselves. But what I think is going to happen, a user is going to just sit inside their chat application and just ask and just going to stay inside there. So what courses does ByteGrad recommend for me? I'm a beginner, right? So now the user is going to hand off this task to an AI agent. The AI agent may decide to go to my website, but then it would have to find the right information. It would be better if my service also offered an MCP server to optimize that. So how would it actually look like? How would you build an MCP server? Well, Vercel actually has a really interesting template. So if you Google for Next.js or Vercel MCP, you'll find a repo there. I modified it a little bit here, but basically I want to offer an MCP server. And remember, it's mostly about tools. In a second, I'll show you some other things as well. But in this case, I would perhaps offer something like a course recommender tool, so that the AI agent invoke that tool and get back the recommended courses, right? So on an MCP server, you have tools. And to set up a tool, Well, the syntax here doesn't really matter. What's important here is how it's structured. So a tool has a name. So the AI agent coming to me will have an overview of the tools with their name. Each tool will also have a description. So the AI agent may have some additional information about which tool to actually invoke. In this case, we only have one tool here, but you can imagine we would have multiple. Now, as we saw before, some tools will require some input. So we will tell the AI agent coming to our service, hey, this tool requires an experience level input. So the AI agent has to give the user's experience level. And then what does the tool actually do? So this is the actual functionality of the tool. It will take that input and it will return, in this case, only text. And it will say something like, I recommend you take the, well, if the user is a beginner, we're going to say the JavaScript course, otherwise the React and Next.js course. Of course, this could be much more sophisticated. We may want to reach out to a database perhaps or some other data source. This is the actual functionality. So this is what you would traditionally have in an API endpoint. This would be the actual handler where you actually have the functionality. So this is what we will return to the AI agent, and the agent will then synthesize the final response to the user. How does the AI agent even know that this tool is available? Well, on an MCP server, you also list your capabilities. So here we have capabilities. So if I'm setting up an MCP server, I'm going to say, well, I have these tools, and in this case, I only have one, and it has a description. Now, there are some other things as well, which I'll show you in a second. And so then you have the MCP server, and now a user can say something like, what courses do you recommend for me? I'm a beginner, or I'm a little bit more advanced. And if you want to see how to set it up from scratch and actually host it online, make sure you check out my other video about Next.js MCP. It's pretty easy to host actually on Vercel, but this is a very basic example of how an MCP server is structured. So the GitHub MCP server is structured with tools. We only saw one tool here, the create repository tool, but there are other ones as well. I can say something like open a new issue in latest repo, just call it test, right? Just as an example, we can see what it will do. It will first need to figure out which is the latest repository. So it will actually need to know some information about myself. So there's actually a get my user profile tool just to learn about the user. There's also a search repositories tool actually to get some information about repositories, and you can see the input that it passed and what it got back. And then it found the latest repository, the AI test repository. Then it used a new tool, open a new issue. That's also a tool. Now, for some of these tools, it may do something that may be a little bit dangerous. So in GitHub Copilot here, sometimes you need to give permission, although I can also say always allow. I will just allow in this session. And now it has finished the task. So you can see in one prompt here, one task, one request essentially, it may actually invoke multiple tools. And so let's actually quickly check out the documentation as well, because it's not only about tools, although that is typically what you will hear and see, and what is typically used by the AI agent. Here they also have a diagram here. So here, to understand this, there is some application also called the host. So this can be like cloud desktops or Visual Studio Code, like I showed you. Typically this is called like the host application, and this will have the MCP client, which connects to an MCP server. Okay, and there are some examples here, and they show you more about the architecture. And here we have the tools, but there are some other things typically on an MCP server as well, like resources. So maybe I don't want to offer only tools. Maybe it should just be some content, some information essentially. In that case, I may want to use resources here. So you can see there's something that can be a file content, maybe some data from a database. Maybe there's a PDF file that is important. You can sort of link to that PDF file so that the AI agent can take a look at that as well. Maybe I have a complete PDF file on which course to pick, right? A whole learning path perhaps in a PDF file. There's also something called prompts. So the AI agent may also ask for the template prompts that a server suggests. So for example, once the AI agent has used an MCP server, there may be some follow-up suggestions here. So after creating a repo, there may be some follow-up button here with like create a README file. The AI agent know to suggest that as the next prompt. Well, maybe it's because the MCP server has a list of those standard prompts as well to make it an even better user experience. So overall, I think very promising standards. Really excited to see where this goes. Hopefully you have a better idea now. Thank you for watching the video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.